So every once in a while you work on a project that you really fall in love with. It's something that you've always dreamed of doing. And for me, this was Meleys' head.
3 dragons fighting, I think that's something we never had before on Game of Thrones. And making them all individual characters, kind of giving them their own style, kind of while fighting and just keeping it clear for the audience who's who was actually kind of a big challenge. When I would start kind of comparing to Game of Thrones, I think the dragons were always a big part of it, so they were kind of carefully sprinkled over the mostly 10 episodes. With House of the Dragon, it already started to become a much more dragon-driven storytelling. This time we had more characters, more dragons, and we wanted to make sure that they all have the personality.
To make sure we can differentiate the different dragons, of course, if you have a shot with them fighting against one another, you want to emphasize what the scale is. So Vhagar was huge, like an old lady over 100 years old. So we want to make sure that the animation underlines the weight of that animal by comparison to a smaller dragon, which is doing much faster wing flaps, is more agile.
When you see the silhouette, you should be able to recognize what dragon it is. Because very often you're looking against the bright sky and you don't really see the colors, but you see the shape.
When we do the turntables for the dragon, we're putting him into a pose that kind of represents these character traits already, rather than just putting him into a technical T-pose. And I think early on that gives the client supervisor and the showrunners an idea of where this is headed.
It's absolutely important to create creatures that are not only fierce or menacing, but audiences can relate to. Because at the end of the day, this is a story-driven show. And dragons are just a part of that story. And I think we do that really well through our animation, through the way we texture and shade our characters. Whether it's Vhagar being angry and starting to attack, or Cyrax feeling empathy, certain elements that really take a lot of finesse and a lot of time dialing in that facial performance and animation of the dragons. Seeing that moment when Vhagar was grabbing onto Meleys' head and seeing the life flee from Meleys' eyes, you get teary-eyed watching that. We've already seen these creatures go through so much. It is House of Dragon, after all.
I mean, one important thing is to make sure that still the audience can follow what's happening, so it's not just chaos. Have some points to focus on, that you know where you are, where things are happening. Sticking with the battle at Rook's Rest, of course there's a lot of visual effects involved there, so it's not just the dragons, it's the environment, which they had a relocation that they filmed at, but wasn't large enough, so most of what we see is actually CG environments. They had extras on sets, all dressed up, but not as many as the story called for, so there was quite a bit of crowd extensions there to make the army a large force, so we motion capturing for that. Then we have a lot of destruction, so as Vhagar is crashing down, there's this big wave of dust and debris flying around from the impact. We have the other 2 dragons, fiery crashes into the castle and into the forest. And then we have the aftermath, you know, where everything is just like this hellscape.
One of the things we learned quite early on is, although the show has fantastical elements, the vision of the showrunner and the client-side supervisor was that this is not a fantasy show, so we had to really ground our environments in reality.
The interior of the Grand Septa, season 1 it was a volume, but we didn't have a volume this time, so we had a very small footprint of a set and then just a blue screen stage. It was like looking at Jim Clay's set, just observing our anamorphic lenses, seeing how much detail got just mushed away. So I think, you know, as environments developed, they would get less and less detail. We put more and more things just into atmosy, shadow.
Dragonstone is something that our audience is already so familiar with. And now in season 2 for House of Dragons, we really bring it to the forefront. There were certain sections of the island which were previously not seen, such as the Crescent Island and the bridge that led to it. So this time around, we had to really finesse and update all the assets. It's not every day you get a chance to work on a dragon, let alone a severed dragon's head. So we were given some concepts that were done by our German counterparts, which looked fantastic. And so that kind of gave us a little bit of groundwork to start with, along with a base model. But then for the needs of our shots, we had to really go in there and sculpt in a lot more detail, add in a lot more of the guts, the blood, just give it that visceral look. And this was a phenomenal asset. Everybody involved loved it.
We explored the idea of what can we actually do in Unreal? Adding new trees or new bushes in the background. So the original idea was that only when we see some of the dragon's head close up and we see some environment in the background, that it might work out just doing this with a real-time engine render. And over the course of the project, it changed a lot. So at the end, we had quite a high number of environments which got rendered in Unreal versus the ones we did in the traditional approach. There's so many small puzzle pieces which need to come together just to create one single shot.
Everybody really was incredible and just really put their best foot forward and really helped us to realize the vision and the final product, just how much love and care was put into this.
When it all comes together in the edit and you see how the framings to tell scale, cutting from, let's say, the actors to the dragons and the communication, this is really kind of, gave me chills. And that is good filmmaking.